skeptical, so unpredictable, here on the SNL Network.
Yes, that is right. The Saturday Night Network is live to recap episodes 1 and 2 of Bupkis, the new show on Peacock, all about Pete Davidson, former SNL cast member, and great one that is. So I'm so excited to get to talk about this show today, and we have a lot to unpack. It just premiered, and I got to watch episodes 1 and 2, and I'm very excited to talk about it with my man, Sammy K. Sammy, how are you doing?
John, I'm doing well. I feel like me and you have been talking about this for a while. Obviously, this show was announced like maybe a year ago or so. And we always knew that when Pete Davidson left Saturday Night Live, that he would be doing something like this. And I'm excited that, during this, I'm not excited for this drought that we have of SNL, but at least the timing worked out to where we have something SNL related to talk about while the strike is just starting with the writers.
Yeah, no drought, a lot of wetness happening on the show. So we'll
just
get
like the
into
opening
it.
scene of Bupkis.
Yeah. And I heard there might be a big wet appearance somewhere down the road, but we will get there.
Oh,
all right. So
man.
welcome on in, everybody. We have a few items of business to get through first. So first of all, previously announced our friend Amanda, who joined us on the Dave Sirus interview last night. She's not with us now, but she'll be with us for the other recaps later on this week. So it'll be Sammy and I taking you through episodes 1 and 2. Also, if you missed that Dave Sirus interview, what are you doing? Go back and listen to that because it was so great. Sammy, Amanda, and I got to talk to Dave Sirus, who is the co-creator and former writer at Saturday Night Live, but the co-creator of Bupkis. And he got to talk all about what it's like to work with Pete Davidson, how they casted the show, so many fun behind the scenes stories. So if you are loving Bupkis, you're really going to love that interview. We also got into a bunch of SNL stuff as well. So Sammy, that was really fun.
Yeah, no, it was really cool to get to talk to him and, like you said, like former writer of Saturday Night Live. And, clearly, this is, a Pete Davidson show, but he has had, so much influence on, and he kind of talks about in the interview about, a lot of his own experience and kind of personality kind of bleeds into the writing. So I'm excited to see that as the show progresses.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to talk about episodes 1 and 2. So make sure that you go and watch them because this will be full of spoilers about them. Sammy and I have not watched anything past episodes 1 and 2 so far. So we don't know anything. We're not going to spoil you on the further ones. So once you're done episode 2, you come back and you join us for that. On Saturday, 2 days from now, we're going to be back to talk about episodes 3 and 4. Monday night, 5 and 6. Wednesday night, 7 and 8. So 2 episodes every 2 days are really easy to follow. And then by this time next week, you'll get all of our recaps for Bupkis. So before we get into the recaps about Bupkis, we had some big news in the SNL universe today that I want to talk to Sammy about. First of all, we found out this was not directly from NBC, so just want to make that clear, but this was reported from a lot of the news publications that are on the press list, just like us, for SNL. And they announced today that right after the Pete Davidson and Lil Uzi Vert episode, we were going to get Kieran Culkin returning to Saturday Night Live with musical guest Labyrinth. And then the finale, the week after that, would have been Jennifer Coolidge with musical guest Foo Fighters. So those apparently are the episodes we would have gotten had there been no writer's strike. As of this moment, my understanding is if the writer's strike was to end by the end of the weekend, they could still happen, but I think it's highly unlikely. So we could talk hypotheticals at this point. Sammy, what were your thoughts when you saw those announcements?
Well, John, I love your optimism, but based on what I'm reading, I don't think the strike is going to end anytime soon, let alone in time for us to get a couple SNL episodes as much as I would like that. But no, when I saw this, I don't know if excited is the right word, but just the idea that SNL wanted to bring Kieran Culkin back so soon was exciting to me as a fan of Succession and as somebody who was a fan of his hosting job last season. Like that would have been exciting. I know some of our friends, when we talked about it, were like, I wish, they could have, grabbed someone else from Succession now that the show is ending, to see them host, which is true. But, a show like Succession for someone like Kieran Culkin only comes around like, It's like a career defining show. So, who knows if he's going to have something like this to kind of promote in the future. So it would have been nice to see him back. And also musical guest Labyrinth. He's the person that does like the Euphoria music, I believe.
Yes,
if I have that right, yeah. So I mean, when he performed at Coachella, he brought out Zendaya. I wonder if that could have been a possibility. Because they collaborated on a lot of music together for Euphoria. So that's kind of something that just popped in my head right now. That could have been interesting. And then Jennifer Coolidge, somebody we've been talking about kind of all season and maybe even last season with kind of the White Lotus hype. Obviously, a comedy legend going back to the Christopher Guest movies. And that would have been awesome. And especially like the season finale. Like we always talk about people who host premieres and people who host finales. Like it's kind of a big deal if SNL kind of brings you in for that. And especially when you look at the musical guests, it's the Foo Fighters, talk about SNL legends. So that would have been awesome. And that one, obviously we've seen Kieran Culkin before, so it's like we've gotten that. But Jennifer Coolidge, if that never happens, that'll be pretty disappointing. So I don't know. Hopefully they get a mulligan.
for sure. So in 1995, June 28th, 1995, Jennifer Coolidge auditioned for Saturday Night Live. She auditioned at the same time as Will Ferrell and Sherry O'Terry and Daryl Hammond heading into season 21 that year. Adam McKay also, John Glazer auditioned, Chris Kattan. Let's see who else is on this list. I have a full list of people who auditioned that day.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else interesting here? But yeah, Jennifer Coolidge is the one.
Isn't Steve Carell also in that zone of like, I remember there always being like, it was either Will Ferrell or Steve Carell for that 95 season. I don't know if that's true or kind of just like,
certainly possible, but not on the
tales.
Yeah, not on the list that I'm seeing right now. So
Okay.
I just looking at an audition schedule from 1995. But
Sure.
Very, very cool. Coolidge to have her come back to the show. I would think if she's willing to host, that was a big question mark for a long time, that's going to happen in the fall, or they're going to find a way, because White Lotus has been over for a while now, I think, or perhaps they wait till season 3 of White Lotus and then they have her back. I know in theory she may or may not be a part of season 3, but I think we'll see what happens there. I think that she is probably a pretty good lock for 49. I think Pete is as well. Kieran Culkin, I think this was the time with Succession. I doubt they're gonna find a way to get him back anytime soon.
Yeah,
I think this is more of a timing thing. Also a little surprised just because I think that he was a good host and the episode was fantastic. One of the best episodes of season 47. I'm just a little bit surprised that they chose him from Succession, or maybe he was the only one that wanted to host, and also that he wanted to do it again, because I felt like it was he closed the loop on something last season. But either way, I think it would have been a very exciting May, and if it ends up happening by some small hope, and also that the writers get their due, I would be very excited about it.
Do you watch Succession, John?
I do.
If you had to pick somebody else other than Kieran Culkin, like one person to, if there was a Succession spot, if you had your choice, like who would you like to see? I'm, curious.
I think Jeremy Strong probably made the most sense to have him on at this point. But
that would be crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I guess he didn't want to do it. Either way, I would have been very thrilled about this May lineup. I think it was very solid. For the third year in a row, we would have gotten a first-time woman hosting the show for the finale. That would have been exciting as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we can look forward to in 49. We're going to talk a lot more about SNL after our Bupkis coverage is wrapped up. We're going to do a final roundtable that'll come up in our final By the Number show. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about this. One more SNL item on the books for tonight, though, Sammy, is that if you're not on social media, Michael Che announced on Instagram that he is putting on a show this Saturday night, May 6th, 11 p.m. doors, 11:30 p.m. start. So when SNL would have aired this week with Pete, Michael Che presents NWA, No Writing Allowed. This is his show that he apparently is producing with some friends. So it's Michael Che and friends. No phones for this one. So I already know that tickets are on sale right now. I believe, do I know where the venue is? It's at the Winery in New York City. So I think this is going to be crazy. And it's going to be not so dissimilar to what we were talking about that happened in 2007, when there was a UCB show. It is like an SNL adjacent style episode, the one that nobody will ever see. Luckily for us, we got some friends of our network who will be there, so we'll be able to talk a little bit about what actually went down at the show after the fact. So stay tuned on the podcast. We'll talk about that next week as well. But Sammy, this is pretty cool.
Oh, it's super cool. I mean, yeah, like when you guys talked about the writer's strike last week with Bill Kenny. Yeah, I mean, that's something that for years, I remember when we first, started talking, or when I, joined the podcast, when we started doing the podcast, I feel like this is like an early conversation that might have come up between the two of us. And you had said at one point, like that you thought you saw it on YouTube back in the day or something. And I've just been like,
saw it.
You think you saw it. It could just be like, no, but I believe you. And I'm just like, man, like I would do some crazy things to be able to watch that because, Superbad is like my favorite movie of all time. Like not just favorite comedy. It's like my favorite movie. Michael Cera is somebody who has never hosted SNL, and Jonah Hill obviously has a couple times. He's a five-timer. So I'm really curious to see like how SNL like this show is going to be. I mean, I feel like it could be very similar to the kind of SNL on strike episode. It would be cool to see if they have a host. I don't know if it would be Pete. I mean, but maybe, I don't know. Like, I feel like anything is on the table as long as there's no writing involved. That's the only thing that's not on the table for this episode. So, and no phones. But other than that, and it sounds like anything and everything is on the table. So I'm curious to see what our friends have to say about it. But I'm very jealous. If I was in New York, I would make sure I was there.
Yeah, we'll get the full report on that, and we'll probably talk about that on Monday night when we're doing episodes 5 and 6 of Bupkis. That'll be Monday. Yeah, so looking forward to that. Okay, let's turn our attention to the show that we're here to cover tonight, which is, like I said, Bupkis, available now on Peacock. This is the first time in a very long time here at the SNN that we're doing something called bonus coverage. Back in the day, we covered Brooklyn Nine-Nine as that show was wrapping up. We had a very fun summer of 2021 talking about that. We also did a little bit of Ted Lasso. So if you do enjoy some bonus coverage every now and then of SNL alumni related projects, let us know. We'd love to do some more if that works for you. But today, I'm excited to get into this show because there was so much hype. Amanda herself talked about attending the New York premiere last week where they showed the first 2 episodes. And to me, it's been nothing but good things that people have been talking about from this show. So Sammy, what were your initial, thoughts coming into this based on what you heard?
My initial thoughts were I feel like I'm gonna like this show because the thing obviously we've talked a lot about season 46, like Pete was able to kind of be a lot more involved in sketches and things like that, but the thing that made Pete really stand out on SNL was him being at the update desk and kind of being able to share things about his life and his perspective, and that is basically what this show is. It's not only the version of Pete that we kind of saw in those initial days of SNL. It's the version of Pete today who has become a megastar, who is, it's always in the tabloids, like who he's seeing and who he's like, having feuds with, public feuds with. And, just to kind of see that and kind of, in a sense, break the fourth wall or kind of see what it's like to be a celebrity and kind of deal with all that was really interesting to me. And then we talk about this with Dave during our interview, but the fact that he got Edie, Falco, and Joe Pesci to be main characters, not just guest stars on the show, is like super exciting as someone who binged Sopranos during the pandemic and as somebody who loves Goodfellas, and Joe Pesci doesn't work that often. So going into it, I was very hyped. And based on these first 2 episodes, I was not disappointed.
Yeah, glad to hear. I wasn't disappointed either, but I did feel like there was a major difference between these 2 episodes, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But like you said, Edie Falco and Joe Pesci are part of the main cast. They are here. So Edie Falco plays Pete's mom, Amy, and then I believe Grandpa Joe is Joe Pesci. Is that what it is? So they're major parts of this show, and we'll start with episode number 1, which is it's like this really raunchy episode. So I'm just going to give a content warning that if perhaps you were listening to the show in the car with your kids, or there's anybody around who you maybe don't want to hear us talk about some of this stuff, just a heads up that this is probably more raunchy than we would usually talk about here on the SNN. But that is the breaks. That's what Pete gives us. And we kick things off episode 1. So we get to see Pete Davidson. He's sitting on his couch with a virtual reality set on, and he's Googling himself, and he looks up, things that you would normally see about Pete. And it's sort of what Dave alluded to, where he said, what do people think about Pete Davidson? That is exactly what you're going to see on this show. So what is the perception of this guy and the characterization? I think that's what they did with everybody here. And the first scene really is he's, using VR, and then he decides, okay, this would be a good time to look at some VR porn. And you see him looking it up, and he's ready to pleasure himself. And but what we unload, yes, and what we find out is upstairs, his mom is doing some laundry. And if you ever used a VR headset before, you can't really see, you can't really hear. So it's a very intense experience. And what basically is happening is, Pete gets up, he walks over, he gets some lubricant to help with his situation, and ultimately ends up in a position where he is about to finish the job. And at the same time, Pete's mom walks down the stairs, and there is like a traffic altercation happening here, where just one hits another, and Pete's mom's shirt is full of it. So
that was a master class in podcasting without trying to hit a censor on the YouTube algorithm to where we're talking about something. Yeah, I mean, you said VR porn, so that that are makes everything else mute. But yeah, you nailed it. That is exactly what happens in the opening scene of Bupkis.
Yeah, people were definitely nailing it.
Yeah. The people
So,
on the VR headset were. Pete was,
Yeah. So this creates a very awkward situation where they agree they're not going to look at each other and talk to each other about this. But I don't know about you, Sammy, but I VR was like a really big thing a few years ago. I remember I was hosting bar mitzvahs, and VR headsets, not like the really big, like expensive ones, but like, maybe the cheaper models, were given out a lot as prizes at events. And so like this was something that like people would give out on the dance floor, like, these like, okay, VR was everywhere. And for me, I've never myself delved into this area of virtual reality. For me, it was more like video games and stuff like that at events, trying this stuff out. But I do know of other people who have done stuff like this. And I would think, Sammy, that it is a really interesting experience being there, but also not being there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. You kind of are doing the thing that they did in the episode where it's like, oh, I'm getting this for my grandpa. It's not for me. And then the hooker on the other end, they're just like, no, okay, you can say if it's about you. So John, you can say, but
it's not.
I mean, I know. And then this is where I say it's not, because I actually do own a VR headset. I got it as a gift like a year ago. And honestly, I've only used it to play a Star Wars game a couple times, which was very fun. But yeah, no, it's an incredibly immersive experience, and I can see how one could get themselves into a predicament such as this. And I will say that the thing that I really liked about this scene is the fact that, this is the introduction of the show. And I feel like, you obviously you see where this is going. Like, you see what the joke is that there's going to be some sort of altercation here between Pete and his mom, and it's going to be so awkward. And like Pete's talked a lot about, how he like lives with his mom and everything like that, and they're roommates basically. So she probably deals with this kind of stuff all the time. But the way that they kind of chose to play it, where Edie Falco isn't kind of going like all Carmela Soprano and like freaking out at Pete and being like the stereotypical mom, she kind of just is like, all right, I'm going to go and wash the shirt again and, rerun the laundry. And then, Pete freaks out because he sees like a couple minutes later that she still has the shirt on with the stain. And she's like, well, I'm about to go work out. I don't want to ruin another shirt. I just thought that was such a smart, like not obvious way to go about it and make it funny, because it's way funnier to see her kind of just act like this is like a totally regular occurrence in the Davidson household than for it to kind of just be like, I can't believe you just did this, Pete. I told you not to, blah, blah, blah. So I really like that. Did you kind of have a similar experience watching that scene?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shows that this relationship is less mother-son and it's more friend to friend. And I think that does happen in a lot of households where like one of the parents passes away. It ends up being, bonding a mother-son relationship or a father-daughter or whatever it is in a different way because you feel like you have to rely on each other differently. And I'm sure that just as much as we see that, Pete's going to need his mom's going to need him and stuff like that. And that is something that certainly in episode 2, it's more heartfelt. Whereas this is more, this is more like crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Look, I don't know about you, Sammy, but I feel that, in my personal experience with situations like this, not a VR headset situation, but situations where, like I like some time to myself, I feel like it is super ballsy to be like, my mom is upstairs. I'm going to just shut off the world and take a chance that she's not going to join me downstairs. I think that was like an insane decision because there's no locked doors. There's no like, it seems like it's not dark out yet. Like this is full on like, don't give an F.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of like his brand. Like he kind of like with on Weekend Update, kind of just like not pour his heart out, but he didn't leave things to the imagination, and I think that's kind of the thing about like Pete and his comedy is like he really minds his experience in his life, and it would not surprise me if something similar to this happened. Maybe not direct contact, but something like this has maybe happened in his life, and he chose to share that with the world for comedy, so we can all appreciate that.
Definitely appreciate that. So he decides to leave the house and he just needs to get out of there. And he ends up sitting in a car having some food with his girlfriend. I believe this is his real life girlfriend, if I understand that correctly.
From Detroit, Michigan is what, which is, where I'm from. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and they were in a horror comedy film together, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
Yep.
So this is
Yep.
Chase We Wonders, and yeah, I believe they are currently dating. So she plays his girlfriend also in the show, and they have some funny jokes about how how his mom saw his pleasure face and and how but it gets a little bit serious about how his girlfriend, he basically says, Pete, every time things get intense, you run away from people that love you, and they talk about how they have broken up before. Meanwhile, Pete's grandfather keeps trying to call him, and ultimately she convinces him to eventually call him back and go see his grandfather, who is played by the great Joe Pesci, who has hosted Saturday Night Live, obviously very well known for many, many things in the past. For me, it's Home Alone especially. But yes. Joe Pesci, so fantastic to get to see him. And they end up going to a diner together and sitting down and having some talks when we find out that he coughs up some blood, and Pete gets nervous because Grandpa Joe might not be around much longer.
Yeah, no, the coughing up the blood. This is a tangent, but wasn't there an SNL sketch from like the Bill Hader era where like there's a character that like kept coughing up blood, and like it was kind of like a runner that like that. If people know what I'm talking about, or if that's real or something else, let us know. But
well, I know Sarah Sherman just did that in the American Girl doll sketch that we saw during the
right. I'm thinking of an older thing, but if I think of it, I'll share it. But no, just like. So cool to have Joe Pesci on the show. I mean, it's just like very, very underrated. I am curious, and if there were any kind of other choices, like Dave kind of told us about, how Lorne kind of had this connection, obviously, since he's like a former host of SNL, but it's cool that he's a part of the show. And I just found his like presence and kind of gravitas. He's not like phoning it in or anything like that, which I don't know if Joe Pesci can do that because he doesn't work enough to have the opportunity to phone it in, because he can go, years and years without appearing on screen. So the fact that he's a part of the show, he's a part of the show. He's a main character. We've only seen the first 2 episodes, but it seems like he's going to be a pretty big presence throughout the show. And just to kind of see their dynamic and the way that Pete and Joe play off each other is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think that it's a reality check for Pete in this scene where he gets to see that his grandfather is going to be dying eventually, and he's already lost a lot of people in his life. To my understanding, we're going to meet Pete's grandmother in episode number 2, but in the present time, she's not around anymore, I believe, at least.
My guess is she's either passed or they're separated or something. you know.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he keeps saying, Grandpa Joe, Pete, I want to hang out with you. I want to get to know you better. I feel like we haven't had the opportunity to really get to know each other since Pete's become this huge star. So he wants to have a boys' night. So Pete ends up going back home to the basement, the scene of the crime, where he ends up sitting down with some friends and I believe like maybe his assistant or whatever. And they decide that they're going to plan a night for Grandpa Joe where they're going to get Grandpa Joe a prostitute, because they think that that's the best part of being boys is getting their friends prostitutes. So they FaceTime with a prostitute and they end up, is this for Pete, is this for the grandfather? They talk through this whole thing and ultimately they decide they're going to meet up with the grandfather and they're going to get him a prostitute. So did you think this was a good plan, Sammy?
For comedy purposes, great plan. I don't think I would ever do this for my grandfather, but I don't know. The thing I liked about this scene, and I hope in the future episodes, we didn't really see this in episode 2, but the kind of dynamic they're establishing between obviously his girlfriend, who we saw in a different scene, or, ex-girlfriend, I guess, in this show. And then like his entourage, I guess. I mean, I know that Dave described the show as kind of like an anti-entourage. So I'm wondering if his assistant and these other characters or friends of his, have like kind of a bigger prominence in future episodes. I'm sure specifically his kind of dynamic with his assistant to me was very funny because it feels like they're basically like the same age. So the idea of like, having someone like Pete Davidson as your boss and having to do these ridiculous things for him. Like he said, like, there's like a line in the episode, like, my job keeps getting like weirder and weirder, like by the day or something. So I found that to be like really great. And I hope we get to see more of that dynamic.
I totally agree. I was thinking the same thing. One of my biggest questions coming out of that episode was Assistant Evan. Like, who is this person? Is this person real? And, I would love to ask Dave eventually, like, what is the craziest thing that Pete's ever had Evan or one of his assistants do? Because this was a pretty nuts task that he gave him, to talk to the prostitute and to get the prostitute to come all the way to the dinner where they're going to all hang out together. So basically what happens is Pete's going to pick up Grandpa Joe, and when Grandpa Joe's walking out, he says Uncle Roy is coming, and I believe this is
Uncle Roy.
Yes, yeah. For all of our SNL fans out there, Uncle Roy is coming. But
I was going to ask you, John, is that like, you think that's got to be like an intentional Easter egg or something?
Okay.
Like, I don't know.
The only way that would happen is if Jane Curtin got that into the script, because I can't imagine how else that would have been done. You think Dave Sirus, who, with all respect and love, and I'm so appreciative he came on the show, you think he's watching 70s SNL? Like, he talked a lot about watching Smigel and all of the TV fun houses on Hulu, but like 70s SNL and getting an Uncle Roy reference, and I feel like
it just feels like a really weird coincidence unless Pete's actual uncle is named Roy. You know what I mean? It's a weird.
But this isn't an actual uncle. This is a friend of, like, I don't think they're related. That was the whole thing. I think that this is a friend of the grandfather.
So the way I picked up on it, and maybe I'm wrong, is he was saying how he's not actually my uncle. That was 8 years ago. I think it was, and I could get this wrong. Maybe it's not an actual uncle. I thought it was Pete's mom's sister's husband, and maybe the sister is passed. So that would be his uncle. That is kind of what I tracked it, because he said something like, "Oh, that was 8 years ago." Blah 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 blah. So, or like, so that is what
so this could be the third sister, because we get to see the second sister getting married,
and maybe they're not together at the point in the timeline yet.
Well, in that case, that is even weirder with the situation. What's going to happen with the grandfather? Because basically,
but I don't know.
This Uncle Roy comes in and decides to join, and Pete's not so happy because he wanted this date with the grandfather and just to be out with them, but Uncle Roy's coming too. Anyways, they all go for drinks. They're at this nice fancy place. Donna, the prostitute, shows up, and right away Grandpa Joe clocks that she is, as he says, he calls her hooker. I don't know if that's a derogatory term or not, but just see that he calls her hooker. And he says, of course I knew, I was the Wilt Chamberlain of Staten Island. Sammy, just if you didn't know that, Wilt Chamberlain's a former basketball player.
I think this was a great opportunity to just say he was the king of Staten Island. A little wink, wink to us Pete fans of that classic film.
Yes, yes, of course. But yeah, Will Chamberlain, very well known for sleeping around, but and also being a great basketball player. But yeah, they're gonna move on to getting the Sinatra suite here in Staten Island, which costed about $5,000 for the night. They all go upstairs together. So this is Pete, Uncle Roy, Grandpa Joe, and Donna, and they're all around hanging out there. They're having a great time. Grandpa Joe's playing piano and singing this magic moment, which is a really nice thing. I mean, I didn't realize that Joe Pesci had such great chops on him to be able to sing like that. That was great.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's another movie or show that I've seen him really sing like that. I recently, when I saw Adam Sandler, found out that Rob Schneider has a good singing voice. Not something I necessarily clocked, and I'm not sure how often he was able to do that on SNL back in the day. But a lot of these people are triple threats. That's how they've become so successful in the business. I did want to just shout out really quickly. I thought the MVP of this episode, as much as I love Joe Pesci, was Brad Garrett. I thought everything he was doing in this episode was amazing. Like, he had so many great lines, and I felt like, they were giving him kind of like dad jokes, making jokes about the Frank Sinatra suite and everything like that. Like, oh, Frank Sinatra better be here if it's $5,000. Like, it was, just really great to have him on the show. And obviously, huge list of guest stars. So I'm excited to see if he pops back up.
Yeah. Were you a big fan of Everybody Loves Raymond? Because I used to love that show. I thought it was really funny.
I wouldn't ever be able to identify or classify myself as a huge fan, but it was definitely one of the shows where if it was on TV as like a kid, I'm like, that's one of the great shows. I'm like, in my head as a child, I'm like, that's one of the great comedies. I don't mind if this is on versus if there was another sitcom that I, didn't have that reverence towards, I'd maybe switch the channel. So if Everybody Loves Raymond was on, I don't think I would switch the channel unless, Jimmy Neutron was on or something.
Yeah, I mean, I used to catch reruns of Everybody Loves Raymond. I think the cast on Everybody Loves Raymond was so great, including Peter Boyle was just so fantastic on that show as well. Obviously Ray Romano, but then Brad Garrett was absolutely hilarious as Ray's brother on that show, Robert Barone, and just I'll know him forever as that. But he's been in a ton of movies too, and he was really, really great here, including when he decides to go ahead and hook up with Donna, the prostitute. So they go into the other bedroom, and Joe and Pete are just chilling and waiting around. Where's Uncle Roy? He's in the bed with the woman, and all of a sudden Roy just starts screaming in pain because his hip is displaced. So he cannot finish the job. A lot of people having weird sexual situations in this episode, but he can't finish the job. So there's this great scene, and it all comes full circle because what's going to happen here is we're going to get a great speech, a great pep talk from Grandpa Joe to Pete saying, if you really want to do something, you really want to be a good person and go ahead and do something, you have to help Uncle Roy here finish the job. So I'll try and describe this the best I can if you didn't watch this and are just listening to the recap for some reason. But basically, the positions that these two are in is Donna is on the bottom and Uncle Roy is on the top. And it's sort of like a top, maybe not like it's not like a 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock situation. Maybe it's more of like a 2 o'clock, 6 o'clock situation.
So there's a lot of sex ed on your end on this episode that, you're giving me, what's the Paul Britton character's name?
Sex ed Vincent?
Yeah, that's you. Yeah, that's what you're doing today, which is great.
Yeah. So Paul Britton, come on the show.
From the side of the penis to the, whatever. Yeah.
So I think, so like, picture this. Basically, like, Brad Garrett is at like a 2 o'clock and Donna is at like a 6 o'clock. So that's sort of like the angle at which this is happening. And because he can't really move, but he wants to finish the job, Pete is going to come in at like 3 or 4 o'clock and basically move Brad in this like thrusting position. So he is being like an aid to like help. He's not like joining the party, but he's like getting a full on assist here where he is pushing Uncle Roy back and forth to get this whole thing done. So this is absolutely insane. So I'm going to say, Sammy, my first thought was, I thought I've seen like every funny sex joke on shows before. I don't know how I've never seen this before. This was hilarious to me.
Yeah, this was like, just the total assist from Pete here, just like absolutely helping his Uncle Roy out. Just a very funny visual. And I guess, it kind of ties into the theme if we're gonna tie this ridiculous sex act into the theme of the episode where, at that earlier diner scene, Grandpa Joe is kind of like, you always focus on making yourself happy. Why don't you help someone else, be happy? And this is what more could you do than to help someone else be happy than do something like this? And this sets up what I think is maybe the best line, at least from Brad Garrett in this episode, or the best line delivery, where, like, as Pete is rocking him back and forth, he kind of like gestures to Pete, turns to him, he's like, I can't believe I'm having sex with Pete Davidson, which is just like an amazing line. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, like, just a great thing to kind of have in your first episode, because that is like, using that persona of his and like the larger than life image, and like this is what a day in the life might be, with maybe a little more of a heightened reality of Pete Davidson. So this was such a great dynamic.
That is so funny. And the dialogue here is fantastic, especially when Grandpa Joe says you're going to be doing him a mitzvah, which is just, it's so funny.
Yeah.
And then at one point, this is so funny in a dark way, but then like Brad Garrett says, like, I feel like a Make-A-Wish kid. And they keep talking about how his wife Marla, and they keep saying like, oh, like the Donna is like, oh, Marla would have loved this. She would have been so happy to be a part of this. And it's so weird and so bizarre. It's an amazing scene, and the just the kicker on all this is that Donna gives full consent, right? They say like, are you okay with this? And she says, yes, I'm okay with this. So the whole act happens. And then the final scene of episode number 1 is Grandpa Joe and Pete come back home, and they get, they're about to eat some lasagna. Amy Davidson comes on in, walks there and sees they're going to eat it cold. No, I'm going to warm it up for you. We're going to have this nice moment between, Pete and his mom and his grandfather all sitting around. And they're like, she's like, so what did you guys do tonight? And then there's an alluding to the first scene, which is like this really awkward moment between Pete and his mom. And it's like, all right, Pete, what happened here? And he's like, all right, well, and then he explains the whole thing. And like, that's the ending of the episode, which is like what happened in the beginning, what happened in the end. And it all comes together for this like crazy, really well-written episode of Bupkis. So Sammy, what were your overall thoughts on episode number 1?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what I said at the beginning, it's, I'm not saying it's like what I expected, but this is like, this is like what I wanted from the show. Episode 2 is more so maybe what I didn't think I wanted from the show, or what I thought a show like this could do. But just like great introduction to the characters and to the tone, and, kind of excited to see how this builds, because episode 2 kind of, takes a bit of a shift in tone. So I'm excited to see what other sort of shenanigans Pete gets into with his grandpa and his mom.
For sure. And I want to say shout out to Dave Sirus on Twitter and Instagram. He posted this video earlier in the day. I don't know if you saw it, Sammy, but it's the behind the scenes of the making of this scene with Uncle Roy, where the producers and Dave and Pete are all talking about what position to put everybody in. And Pete is suggesting that Donna be on all fours, and that would be funnier to have him basically behind them, and if you're watching the video, like a little bit of that going on. And so just seeing the makings of this and then talking about it, I think they were having an absolute blast. And I know that these types of shenanigans, all the guy stuff, the guy talk that they're talking about, isn't really for everybody, but nobody was harmed in the makings of all of this stuff. And I think they were just having fun between family and friends. So for me, this was a very fun episode. This would be typical like sitcom work. And I think this was great. And it's sort of what I was expecting in episode 2, but wow, what a major tone shift between episode 1 and 2, because we basically open up on a flashback of late September 2001, where Amy Davidson is driving Pete and his sister Casey to a wedding, and they're a little bit late for the wedding, and they're running on in, and basically they're driving on the bridge, and you see the still the smoke coming out of the Twin Towers, where September 11th was very recently, and most people know that this is a real story, that Pete's dad died at 9/11 and was by most people would say that he was a hero. And, there's all these crazy stories about things that, that happened that day, and the horrific tragedy of it all. And, this has basically shaped Pete's, comedy in his entire life. But we're really going to dive right into this here, where we go from, if you're watching episode 1 and 2, for me, it's very jarring, because then it's like, oh, I'm expecting this is going to be a lot of fun. But it's very sad scene in the car where they're driving to the wedding, and they're discussing if, between Pete and his mom, like, and Pete's like a young kid at this point. It has to be like, I would assume like 10 years old or something like that. And he is talking with his mom about if they're going to actually tell the sister what happened to their father. And, Pete's wearing his father's necklace, and he's saying like, is this okay? So it's a really like touching, sad moment that we get to start episode 2. What were your thoughts when this came on the screen for you?
It was something that I should have thought, or should have expected that at some point the series would touch on, because this kind of series is following a bit of the, model or tone of something like Louis, or, Atlanta, or Dave, where you kind of have like these, episodes that maybe, take a look at the, the main character's past and everything like that. And especially because, I just remember the first time that Pete ever brought up on Weekend Update that, his dad died in 9/11. I was just like, whoa. Like, that's like, I personally don't know anybody that was affected like that. And the fact that it was somebody who ends up on SNL, it's a crazy sort of origin and tragedy. But I was like really just curious, what are they going to mine from this, or what is like a particular memory, or, that they're going to take away from this story. And I feel like they kind of subvert it a little bit, because you're thinking, are they driving to the funeral? I know it's, it's already like
Right.
September 20th. It's like September 28th or something like that. So it's already, 2 weeks or something after, 9/11, which, in the Jewish culture, you got to have a funeral really quickly. But I know, and, that's not always the norm. But then it turns out to be a wedding, which was kind of surprising. And then you're kind of seeing him as a young kid dealing, and his whole family kind of dealing with, this tragedy. It's probably the first kind of major family event that's supposed to be a happy thing that's happening for them after this, event, and kind of seeing how they all deal with it.
Exactly. And you see traditional, or what you would expect, basically, not traditional, but typical signs of what would happen to a child in this situation who just is feeling lost and not sure how to handle the situation, which is he's going to rebel a little bit. And, during the ceremony, which is, by the way, it's Amy Davidson's sister is getting married. So we're getting to see Grandpa Joe, and then Jane Curtin, who plays Joe's wife and Pete's grandmother, Marie, is there, and they're walking down Pete's aunt down the aisle, and we get to see the wedding and stuff like that. But during the wedding ceremony, Pete is calling out, I think at one point the priest, who's played by Steve Buscemi, we'll talk about that in a second, says, there is always joy, there is always light. And then Pete yells out, not. And then later on, they're trying to take the photo, and he doesn't want to smile for the camera. And it's just like, gosh, like to imagine like what it's like to be a kid and being there, and supposed to be like this happy celebratory occasion, but the family is obviously devastated at the tragedy. It is a very, very tough situation. And to watch this, what I assume is through Pete's eyes, and his way he wanted the story to be told, is fascinating. Of course, it's in addition to that, the extra layers on top of this are the stunt casting that we get, all the amazing guest stars that are here, which, like I said, Jane Curtin, original Saturday Night Live cast member. So amazing and incredible to think about somebody who started the show in 1975 and was there till 1980 is in a scene with a cast member. And I guess it's a kid. It's not really like Pete, but Pete is there, like,
Right.
somewhere involved with Pete, who was on the show up until 2022. Like, that to me, just the mix of like Pete Davidson and Jane Curtin being on the show together. I know they were both at SNL 40, but like that probably be the only time they crossed over with each other. To me, Jane Curtin just being there was so cool.
It's amazing. And obviously the part she's given to play, it's not, and the tone of the episode, it's not the most comedic part. There is like a really funny exchange later on in the episode between her and the young Pete. But yeah, when we found out about this was happening, and when I saw that in the list of guest stars, I was like, oh my God, this is just so cool. Obviously Lauren Michaels and Broadway Video produced this show as well. So it was just really great to see her. And yeah, I mean, I guess we don't know because we haven't seen the future episodes, but I don't know if Jane had the opportunity to have a scene with Pete, depending on the story that you choose to go with, if she's still alive or if her character's still alive or whatever. But would be really cool if there's some sort of behind the scenes photo, which I'm sure there has to be, between Pete and Jane Curtin. I think hopefully we get to see that.
Yeah, for sure. And then what do you think about Steve Buscemi coming here to play Father Mac?
I love Steve Buscemi. Obviously, going back to all the Adam Sandler movies and just all the other things he has done, and he was obviously in King of Staten Island. And yeah, same thing. He's kind of a presence throughout this episode, but he really has like kind of one scene where you're like, oh, this is why you get Steve Buscemi, where Pete is kind of acting out at the wedding, and he keeps ruining photos, as you said before. And his mom is getting really frustrated with him, and so the priest kind of calls him over. He's like, I got this. And he was just going on this. I wish I had written down specific quotes, but had some amazing lines about how your dad died in 9/11, and 11 times 3 is 33, and that's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and basically your dad is Jesus reincarnate. And it's just like the delivery. It's why you kind of get someone like Steve Buscemi to take something that could be not the most hilarious thing in the world, but he just kind of milks it for everything he's got. And that was just such a great little scene there.
It was very good, very well done. And then there's really two main acts to this particular episode. One is Amy Davidson here, Edie Falco's character, is dealing with her husband recently passing away, and we get to see her dynamics with everybody. So people keep coming up to her to say their condolences and that they wish their best for the family, including Marissa Janet Winokur, who I know from winning Celebrity Big Brother. So that was a fun little cameo. But also the relationship between her and her mom, Jane Curtin here, where they're talking about, you never really liked Scott, and this really sucked, but also, he died on Jane Curtin's birthday. So there was this whole thing where Pete ends up overhearing that his grandmother never really liked his father, and that is ironic that he died on her birthday. And, there's this really weird exchange between the grandmother and Pete, which I don't know how real this was, about how, like she says, Pete, your birthday is going to be in 2 months. And he says, well, I know what I'm going to wish for. And it's like this really angry kid is talking to his grandmother, and then this awkward moment where Jane Curtin makes the speech at the wedding. So this is all like a really interesting family dynamic that's on one side, and then there's this relationship between Pete and his uncle, which we'll get to in a moment. But anything there on any of the Amy Davidson stuff?
The only thing I'll add, and I alluded to like that scene before, but the kind of scene between young Pete and Jane Curtin, I was getting such, and maybe it's just because it's Jane Curtin, I was just getting such like kind of Jane Curtin Weekend Update vibes of like having a guest like Rosanna Dana, and just like trying to like understand, just kind of like be like disgusted and like, why is this happening, and whatever. So after almost 50 years, like, just Jane Curtin still got it.
She still got it. Yeah. I could even I know it's a while ago, but Third Rock from the Sun, she's so fantastic in that show.
Mm-hmm.
I love her. I think she's one of my favorite cast members of all time, honestly. So for me, so exciting to have her there. But yeah, I mean, the main crux of this episode, and it's really a flash forward situation where Pete is talking to his new uncle who marries his mom's sister. And this is Uncle Tommy, who's played by, is it Bobby Cannavale? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
So he's been in so many things, and I find he's actually fantastic wherever I get to see him in any of these shows. So for you, how did the casting work here from Bobby Cannavale?
Oh, just like immediately I'm like, oh, this is like perfect casting. Like, you really see it like in the flash forwards at like kind of putting him and Pete next to each other. It's like, oh yeah, like they totally look alike. I can totally buy this as his uncle, which I'm not sure if this is the mom's brother or if he's marrying
I think
the
he's
mom.
marrying the mom's
Okay,
sister.
okay. So
Yeah.
then they shouldn't look alike anyways, but still it works. And no, this was really, really great casting. Like he just very similar to Joe Pesci, kind of just brings this sort of gravitas. And, it's just another example of, and it's kind of said throughout earlier on in the episode when he's talking to who I assume is a cousin, where it's like, oh, well, now that you don't have a dad, like, the uncles, you have 5 dads now. So this is just like one example of somebody who, is kind of filling the giant void left by Pete Davidson's father. And, throughout the episode and the title of the episode, he keeps saying, like, do as I say, not as I do, as, he's teaching Pete, the right way to, pee at a urinal, which my girlfriend, when we were watching this episode, asked, like, does that always happen? Like, boys start with their pants on the ground? And like, I don't know about you, John, but I feel like I definitely did that, like, growing up as a
You
kid.
started with your pants. I don't remember ever starting with my pants on the ground. That's what I was gonna say.
I feel like
I've always
I definitely did.
okay, because I come from a family that's very like try and not get things dirty. So like I feel like it was
Okay.
always like don't let your pants like fall to the ground, like type of thing. Like even like if you're like sitting on the toilet, like be careful not to let your pants like fall to the ground, especially like nice
But
pants.
I see that perspective, but I can also see and maybe why you're kind of taught or you assume you have to do it this way to where you don't want to accidentally get pee on your pants, which I feel like when you're younger, maybe, it's just harder if you're trying to pop it, through the fly. But again, I don't know. I don't know. But I feel like I definitely started that way. And, to our listeners, if you did too, like we can start like a support group. But and I don't remember when that switch changed.
So who taught you? Yeah.
Definitely not my uncle. It was probably just like another kid, like a normal sort of like one kid was probably just like, what were you doing? Just don't do that, which is similar
Right.
to this scene. But
Yeah, see, because I think whoever invented the like the fly thing where you could just stick it through, because not all pants have that, right? Like sometimes you just have to pull your pants down a little bit. But whoever invented that was a genius because it
no, yeah.
saves a lot of work, and obviously you could like shake it out a little bit so that you don't have to get the pee in your pants. But I think so. Anyways, yeah, that was the first main scene, and then we get this moment basically where Pete sees his uncle's penis, and just there's obviously it's a fake one in the show, but I'm saying like he just like has this like wide-eyed look of like whoa, and then learns about this trick to pee through his pants that way, and he keeps doing that for the rest of the night. So already like really influenced by his uncle. And then at one point his uncle invites Pete with his friend to end up going to pick up some drinks, which I guess there's not an open bar situation happening here. They're going to some like convenience store, and
or were they getting cigarettes?
Oh, they might be getting cigarettes, right? You're right.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
You're right. Yeah, that's what it was. Anyways, a lot of cocaine action happening here because we get to see Pete watching his uncle do coke and his uncle's friend do coke, and then it's a lot of do as I say, not as I do. And yeah, that's pretty much the theme of all this. And then there is this very weird moment where I'm not sure if this is my only thing, and I guess it was like a nice moment, but I'm not sure that I fully got what they were going for here, where Uncle Tommy is singing this song by Creed in the car, My Sacrifice, where he's just like singing it loud in Pete's face, but it goes like on a long time here. Did you get what they were going for?
I think I just got that clearly, and we see this in the flash forwards that Uncle Tommy is just having some issues. Obviously, he's doing cocaine at his wedding, and is just clearly just even though. And I feel like there's like some hints to that in the conversation in the car with his friend where it's like, like she's great. You gotta lock it down, like between, you and I'm not remembering what his wife's name is, but yeah, I think he's just clearly going through some sort of, I guess at this point, not midlife crisis, but eventually leads to a midlife crisis later in the car scene, later on in the flash forwards of the episode where I just feel like he's, kind of ties back to the do as I say, not as I do, where, I feel like Tommy knows like what he should and shouldn't be doing. And he's trying to, teach the young Pete, like through his words, not what not to do. But in reality, he's, doing drugs and he's, just doesn't have all his stuff together. But I do want to shout out this one line from the guy in the car, which is such like an offhanded line that maybe because I'm like a movie buff, I thought was hilarious. But the line about A Beautiful Mind, where he's like, that's a movie that came out in 2001. So it's like, oh, you see that movie? He's like trying to make conversation with the young Pete while Bobby Cannavale is like out of the car. It's like, oh, you see that movie, A Beautiful Mind? Like, oh, Russell Crowe, he can do anything. He's like talking to like a 7-year-old kid if he saw A Beautiful Mind. I just thought that was, 2 weeks after his dad like died in 9/11. I just thought that was so funny. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess I get that because he's really just it's trying to show that his uncle is having this crisis and not sure if he wants to get married, and then he's wants to be free, doing drugs, drinking, smoking, all this stuff. So it's like a little bit of an influence on Pete, where in his future life and how he's going to be. So I do get that aspect, but I did feel like it went on a little bit long. But for me, there was one scene here that was insanely relatable because I DJ for weddings now. Even
I knew this would be a scene that resonated with you.
Yeah, so the DJ is playing the songs and like some kid comes up to him, in this case Pete Davidson, and says like, "Can you play Cotton Eye Joe?" And the thing is like when you're DJing these events, you're getting like a flow going, right? Like it's sort of like picture Uncle Roy with the thrusting, like you're getting something going, right? So you're like, don't want anybody to miss.
I was picturing the other Uncle Roy for a second.
No, the one from this show, and basically like that's the analogy I can make, which is like you're getting your groove on, you're going, and like there's something working here, you get in the dance floor, it's populating, and then some kid comes in and throws something into the mix and says, "Can you play this?" And all of a sudden your hip is displaced because the whole dance floor breaks apart when you're trying to play
and you
this
need
track
Uncle
here.
Tommy to come in and rock you into place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. That is my experience here at many events where I just completely get thrown off by somebody asking for music. And again, like I'm not playing for myself. I'm playing for the crowd. I want everybody to have a good time. But based on my professional experience, I tend to know like, okay, the dancer is going this way. I'm there to read the crowd and whatever it is. So it is so difficult when something else gets thrown in the mix. However, Uncle Tommy comes in and basically yells at the DJ, throws off his headphones. I've had some very interesting experiences with guests and clients and all that stuff. Fortunately, no one's ever physically taken headphones off my head and thrown them down.
That's good.
But yeah, Cotton Eye Joe ends up playing. And I will say personally, Cotton Eye Joe is a jam. Like it's always, pretty fun whenever you're going to do animation songs like that. So I'll usually do some back-to-back with a little bit of
Cha-Cha Slide.
Cha-Cha Slide, Hey Baby, Cotton Eye Joe, like all that stuff. They're usually a good mix to go in together, but it depends like what type of crowd you end up having. And in this case, everybody was doing the Cotton Eye Joe and having a good time. Also very tiring dance. I don't know if you've ever done Cotton Eye Joe, but it is heel toe, do the Cotton Eye Joe. Crazy.
I went to the bar mitzvahs in the late 2000s. Of course, I've done the Cotton Eye Joe many a time. I was going to ask you, and we can go back to the episode. What is the Gen Z version of Cotton Eye Joe? Like, what are kids today asking over and over again? It doesn't have to be a line dance, but like, what's like that kind of meme sort of song that people are like, play this?
Well, I think it's like a lot of TikTok dances. So I think that would be the modern version of that. Before that, it was like a lot of like hip hop music video. Before that, I would say there was like some Hannah Montana in there with the Hoedown Throwdown. So like that was something that was pretty big once I first started DJing. And then before that, like a lot of these, I like to call them animations. I feel like that's like where you could basically get on the microphone and guide everybody. There's like a Jackson 5 one that we do sometimes too. So there are some like good ones to really get a crowd going, and Cotton Eye Joe is certainly on that list. So I could see why it worked.
I feel like I was definitely an annoying kid when it came to song like requests. And I feel like there is a 0% chance that when I was on the bar mitzvah circuit that I tried to request a Lonely Island song at a bar mitzvah. And I feel like there's no chance that request was ever granted.
Yeah. Well, we have played Lonely Island, I'll say that, at events myself. So that is not too bad for your DJ, but we have done that for sure a bunch of times. And it depends which one or what type of event. Maybe more for weddings, like we'll play stuff like that. Not necessarily for bar mitzvahs. Like, yeah, I played I Just Had Sex a few times at weddings before because
hell yeah.
So I think at my wedding, we're definitely gonna have to play some Lonely Island.
Yeah.
But yeah, 100%. And like, this is all in good fun here, and this is like the one time where I think like Pete is having just like a really good time dancing with everybody. And we do get a flash forward to the future where Pete and his uncle are together, and he's talking about like maybe it's not working out in this relationship where we saw the marriage, and now flash forward, they're potentially going to get a divorce, and him and his aunts are not good in a good place. They end up going and driving Pete's car, and we get Uncle Tommy basically almost getting them into a real traffic altercation here. He's thinking about driving off a bridge. Like, it gets a little bit scary here. Like, I think Pete is legitimately scared, and ultimately drops off Uncle Tommy. Said he's feeling old and all that stuff. And I think Pete has this really poignant moment where he's talking to his uncle, saying, and this is something interesting because we've seen Pete grow up on SNL, which is like, Pete's uncle is 50 or whatever it is, and still hasn't figured it out. And Pete says, like, when I was 21, I thought I'd figure it out by 24, and then 24, 27, and 27, 33. Like, it's like you always think you're going to figure it out, and maybe you just don't. And I thought that was like probably the most beautiful moment of the episode. Just that talk that they had at the end.
Yeah, no, certainly was reminding me of, I guess it was the first time we thought Pete was signing off of Update and saying like, thank you guys for letting me like grow up in front of you guys. And that's like kind of a similar thing to where he's, we've seen him grow up, and we see him still, be in like the tabloids or whatever, and kind of, getting into, certain things. But, I guess that's kind of all part of life. And I do think, even though like this was certainly intense, this whole car scene, there's a point where his uncle has him like unbuckle. He's like, come on, just unbuckle. Like, that was like insane. But I just loved how there's like this kind of undertone of like, clearly like his uncle like voted for Trump or is like a big MAGA guy. He's like before you even see the truck, they're like walking up there. It's like, I thought you weren't a Trump guy. And it's just like a big pickup truck. So I thought that was a good little dig there.
Yeah, I agree. And really, this episode sort of wraps up on this flashback where we actually get to see, this is all the fictionalized version, but having fictionalized Amy meet Scott, Pete's father, at a bar, and then watching TV with Pete. And, we do hear at some point that they're thinking about having other children before 9/11. So it's like this really just like, beautiful, but also sad moment of seeing the family all together before 9/11. And then to me, like the cherry on top of what I think is just a really fantastic episode of television is the episode ends on real pictures of Pete at this wedding and the family all in. You see Amy, you see Casey, like the real life versions of all of them at this wedding back in the day. And it is just like heartbreaking, but also super touching. And I don't know about you, Sammy, but like, I think, what they did in episode 1 was really it was really funny. It was something you would see on sitcoms typically. And it was like, at moments I'm like, oh, this is kind of smart or whatever. But it was episode 2 for me that cemented like, oh, this is a really good show, which is not just comedy, but it's mixed in with this like layer of like, oh, there's like a real guy in here who has like really struggled. And now that he's able to like project his consciousness into this piece of art, is actually layered in. This is not just a stupid show, but actually something interesting and worth watching. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, it makes sense that he'd want to kind of, pay tribute to his dad in, some sort of way, like on the show. I think it's really cool that, they kind of, did that right off the bat in like episode 2. And now that we've kind of gotten the sample size of episode 1, very much straight up comedy, episode 2, a lot more elements of drama. I'm really curious as we progress to these next 6 episodes, kind of what the balance is. If, it's kind of going to be, a very funny episode and kind of a more serious episode and, back and forth. Because obviously Pete's talked a lot about his challenges with like, mental health issues and things like that. So I would not be surprised if he tries to touch on that, in other episodes, but I'm excited to see what else we have in store.
Absolutely. So episode number 3 is titled Picture. Episode number 4 is titled Crispy Town. Sammy and I, like I said, have not watched it yet. So we're going to get to watch that over the next couple of days and then be back here on Saturday to talk about episodes 3 and 4. I'm really looking forward to seeing what those episodes entail. That should be a lot of fun as we progress. And if you enjoy the show or you have any feedback or comments on what we said here today about episodes 1 and 2, let us know in the comments. This is always a really fun interactive experience to watch these shows together and get to talk about them. So congratulations to everybody who worked on these first 2 episodes. It is a really fun show to get to watch and get to cover, and looking forward to the rest. All right. So this was a great time hanging out with you, Sammy. We got to talk all about the SNL news happening in the world and the first 2 episodes of Bupkis. Any final thoughts, and what's up with you? Where can the listeners check out everything you got going on?
I mean, all week this week, you guys will be able to see me all over the SNN doing this Bupkis coverage. And obviously, we just had a chance to interview Dave Sirus. So definitely, if you have not gotten the chance, that's like I said on my Twitter, nice little appetizer for the Bupkis. It could also be a little dessert if you want to watch all of Bupkis and then watch our interview to kind of get some more context for some of the stories that he's talking about. We also just did a super fan takeover, which was a lot of fun. Our favorite, cast member hosted moments of all time. Obviously, there are a lot to choose from. So I hope you guys, let us know, what you thought of that, and what are some of your favorite moments. And then you guys can check me out on social media at @ThatSammyK on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And we'll see you guys soon for some more coverage.
Absolutely. So plan is, like I said, Saturday 3 and 4, Monday 5 and 6, and then Wednesday 7 and 8. If SNL is not coming back, which most likely it's not, we're gonna do our wrap-up coverage the following week, where we're gonna have our final postseason roundtable, and then after that we'll do eventually our by the numbers final show for the season, and then our final patron feedback show where we'll have our patrons call in as well. So lots of coverage still to come here, and then eventually we'll head over to some summer coverage throughout while we wait for season 49 of Saturday Night Live. So if you want to check out everything that's going on over here, follow us on social media at the SNL Network, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. All right, for Sammy K and myself, John Schneider from the Saturday Night Network, we will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.